So our theme for this month is Outwitting the Myth of the Devil. And today's talk is titled Afterword. And that will reveal itself in a few moments. Afterword. Last week, after the service, I announced that if any of you had any ideas or wishes about some topics that you'd like me to address in our Sunday talks, to please let me know. And as the saying goes, it's working. Because almost immediately I had a most interesting request. So for the remainder of April, our theme for the Sunday talks will be Outwitting the Myth of the Devil. And today's talk is Afterword. You know, I've been here with Centers for Spiritual Living on the island for about 4.5 years. How many times have any of you heard me talk about the devil? The who? The who? As Dennis Merritt Jones says in his book, How to Speak the Science of Mind, which looks like this and is available for anyone who'd like to have one. He, in the definition of the devil, says, oh, that's just one letter removed from evil. I never thought of it that way before until I read that. Because neither of those words is hanging out in my vocabulary any longer. They're not the truth of my being, nor are they the truth of your being either. But they are in the fabric of some religions. And they are in the fabric of individuals and cultures from a collective cultural consciousness of people who look for reasons outside themselves to explain bad things, mean actions, painful and cruel occurrences, or immature behavior. And without being crass or uncaring, it does sometimes remind me of an old comedy TV program called The Flip Wilson Show. Anybody else remember that program, The Flip Wilson Show? Yeah. Flip was a funny guy. And he played many different personalities on his show. One of his favorites was this ditzy character whose favorite line was, "The devil made me do it." You remember that. The devil made me do it. The devil made me do it. All kinds of different ways to emphasize that. Because for many people who don't yet understand their own powers of goodness and light, the devil made me do it is like a default. It's like saying, I would never do that. It must have been some dark, sinister power out there somewhere that made me do it, that overrides my good and my good intentions. In fact, if you think about it, that may be another way of thinking or saying, I do believe in a creator, a universal energy, God, if you will, of goodness and light, and it wouldn't make me do that, so it must be something else, someone else that seeks to destroy God and what God creates, which would be me. So how did all of this kind of thinking happen? How did it come about? In our metaphysical studies, we call this duality, meaning there are opposing but equal powers wrestling for our loyalty, our vote, if you will, for control of the universe. Yeah, that kind of sounds like a video game at best. or two different countries or ideologies at worst, trying to annihilate each other. And somewhere in between exists the mythical Darth Vader. Oh, please. Oh, please. How could anyone believe that we were created for the purpose of doing each other in? What would be the purpose of that? So though in our human immaturities, we do that sometimes, or try to. And it's almost always because we believe either that it's, quote, in the name of God, which is religious conflict, or we believe for the greater good, which is religious conflict. In other words, we're trying to outwit the devil. Ideologies, almost without exception, in the human equation, have at their core religious bases, often at the outer edges, which we call fanaticism. So even at our human worst, we can't avoid recognizing a power for good. We just try and shrink it or express it to our current level of understanding. If the only thing you remember about today's talk is the current level of our understanding, that's enough, because that tells each one of us where we are in consciousness. We are at our current level of understanding. And in some cases, we name it. We name it our cause. So everything else must be their cause, which of course means the theys are the bad guys, the devils. It's like inventing a way to denying the good by manufacturing something that has to acknowledge it in order to destroy it. You see the dichotomy there? I never really quite thought about it this way until I started writing this talk. That the only duality is trying to find a way to negate or deny or destroy the good, which is another way of acknowledging it in a negative way. So, well, how about if we move on from the histrionics of this story to something more interesting and more nurturing? My favorite philosopher, may the force be with him, speaks clearly and confidently when he says, the devil is a myth, meaning a folktale, a legend, a fable, a parable, an allegory. And while these forms of stories often carry with them the author's or teller's desire to bring forth a moral or a spiritual message, they do not bring forth a corresponding force. Only the listener can provide that. We teach in the science, in the philosophy of the science of mind, that when we know better, we do better. Another way that Ernest Holmes says that is, in such degree as we recognize the spirit of goodness, it becomes manifest. In modern language or lingo, we would say energy flows where attention goes. And that is not just us, the metaphysical side of spirituality that believes and practices this. I DVD a lot of the Super Soul Sunday programs on TV to watch other than on Sunday morning because I work then. And recently, Oprah interviewed Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen is a minister who shepherds a very large Christian church on the mainland. And she asked him, "Why don't I ever hear you talk about the devil?" His response was that humankind has beat itself up enough with that story. His words, story. He prefers to talk about the lovingness of God and how people can choose to express that through their thoughts and their behaviors. And that he prefers to urge people to live from the gratefulness of their hearts for the good they experience, because like attracts like. So while no one, mystic or fundamentalist, denies the experience of negative, unhealthy, or cruel behaviors, what we can all do is to focus on their opposites. And by doing so, deny the negative as a necessary experience for ourselves and for anyone who's open to doing so. The reality that we wish to uncover and shine the light on is that happiness, peace, safety, and prosperity are the true inheritance. And each of us can and does do this with every positive action we take in our lives and as we ever increase our awareness of which is which, the negative or the positive. So now I want to talk to you for a moment about the afterword. Such an interesting word, isn't it? I did something when I began to work on this talk that I almost never do. First of all, you'll hear more about this book as the weeks pass. But something I almost never do is go to the back of a book. I graciously plow my way through from beginning to end. But this one I went to the back. And in the back, I found a section titled Afterword. And I'm going to tell you who wrote it because it's important to what I'm about to share with you. It's written by Michael Beckwith, Reverend Dr. Michael Beckwith, who is the founder and the senior pastor at the Agape International Spirit Center in Southern California, specifically Culver City, if that means anything to you. Michael was a part of the Centers for Spiritual Living for a number of years and eventually spun off Agape as an independent. However, all of their curriculum is the same curriculum you take when you take classes with us, because he, number one, helped develop some of it, and number two, recognizes the value of it for students. So Michael Beckwith wrote the afterword to the book Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. This manuscript was actually developed back in the late 30s. In fact, the date, which was listed, was 1938. It was not published then. Who remembers what was published in 1938? The Science of Mind text by Ernest Holmes. This was not published until 2011 by Napoleon Hill's heirs, and we'll talk more about that next week. But here's what Michael Beckwith has to say about Hill's principles, which are to teach us how to fail successfully. This is a paradox, Michael says, understood by the spiritually mature. So welcome to the spiritually mature this morning. those whom he describes as having risen above the hypnotic rhythm and discovered their other self, which can also be identified as the higher self or the authentic self, because that's contained within all of us. And then Michael goes on to explain that many of today's spiritual, philosophical, self-help, and even scientific authors share Hill's view of what he calls definiteness of purpose, or in the current language, intention setting. When it's our intention to wake up from the hypnotic rhythm of living, and what do we call that? In Science of Mind, we call that hypnotic rhythm collective consciousness. To wake up from the collective consciousness and begin to recognize our own consciousness, the value of it, the power of it, and the connection that you have with your source of being, with God, with Spirit, with divine intelligence. So there's much more to the afterword. And it's so important that we are able to take text like this, which has a lot of valuable information in it, including what Napoleon Hill really means when he talks about the devil. And as I explore his ideas, I'll be adding to them some of the additional authors, speakers, thinkers, scientists of our generations and how they are relating to it as well. Because we live in such an incredible time of unfolding. What a joy, what a gift to be living in today's world. So my purpose today has been to give you a basis upon which we can discuss and understand these many opinions, differences, and similarities of the world around us without being negatively or unnecessarily influenced until we can choose our own. We do ourselves such a disservice when we lock on something as our belief or our opinion before we have an opportunity to test it against some other ideas, including our own individual intuition. So in next week's talk, then I'll begin bringing the process of bringing to you the thoughts and ideas from a number of well-known and respected authors, speakers, thinkers, and doers. I want to share with you something that Ernest Holmes says as he looks at how we relate to the world around us. He says evolution is the effect, not the cause, of intelligence. Evolution is the awakening of our essence, our individual essence, to a recognition of its unity within the wholeness and the goodness of the creative energy of the universe. Spirit is limitless, but it can only be to us what we believe it to be. We get to decide how we hear it, process it, and live it. But until we believe it is, we're believing it's not. That's another one of his seeming paradoxes that when you stop to think of it, makes so much sense. Until we believe it is, it's not. And therein lies the challenge of understanding this power that's within each one of us, that it's ours to direct and to manifest from, and to demonstrate that then accordingly. Until next week, and so it is.